Hi guys, let's start part number 2 of chapter number 4, that is Forest Society and Colonialism. 2.1. How were the lives of people affected? Foresters and villagers had very different ideas of what a good forest should look like. Villagers wanted forest with a mixture of species to satisfy different needs like fuel, fodder, leaves, etc. The forest department, on the other hand, wanted trees which were suitable for burning ships and railways. So we have some new words. What is scientific forestry? It is a system of cutting trees controlled by the forest department in which old trees are cut and new ones are planted. We have a figure here. So figure 12. Collecting mahua, Madhuka indica from the forest. Villagers wake up before dawn and go to the forest to collect the mahua flowers which have fallen on the forest floor. Mahua trees are precious. Mahua flowers can be eaten or used to make alcohol. The seeds can be used to make oil. They needed trees that could provide hardwood and were tall and straight. So the forest department, that is the government, they needed wood for building ships and railways. And for that what they needed was that trees that would provide hardwood and were tall and straight. So particular species like teak and sal were promoted and others were cut. The forest areas people use okay in forest areas people use forest products like roots, leaves, fruits and tubers for many things. Fruits and tubers are nutritious to eat. So fruits and tubers are nutritious to eat, especially during the monsoons before the harvest has come in. Herbs are used for medicines, wood for agricultural implements like yokes and plows. Bamboo makes excellent fences and is also used to make baskets and umbrellas. A dried, scooped out gourd can be used as a portable water bottle. Almost everything is available in the forest. Leaves can be stitched together to make disposable plates and cups. The Siedi, that is Bohemia valley creeper, can be used to make ropes, and the thorny bark of the simur, that is silk cotton tree, is used to grate vegetables. Oil for cooking and to light lamps can be pressed from the fruit of the mahua tree. We have another figure, figure 13. Drying tendu leaves. The sale of tendu leaves is a major source of income for many people living in forest. Each bundle contains approximately 50 leaves, and if a person works very hard, they can perhaps collect as many as 100 bundles in a day. Women, children, and old men Women, children, and old men are the main collectors. The Forest Act meant severe hardships for villagers across the country. After the act, all their everyday practices like cutting trees for their houses, grazing their cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting and fishing became illegal. So all their everyday activities, everything, almost everything, it became illegal. Then we have figure 14, bringing grain from the threshing grounds to the field. The men are carrying grain in baskets from the threshing fields. Men carry the baskets slung on a pole across their shoulders, while women carry the baskets on their heads. People were now forced to steal wood from the forest, and if they were caught, they were at the mercy of the forest guards, who would take bribes from them. Women who collected fuel wood were specially worried. It was also common for police constables and forest guards to harass people by demanding free food from them. 2.2 How did forest rules affect cultivation? One of the major impacts of European colonialism. So, one of the major impacts of European colonialism was on the practice of shifting cultivation or Sweden agriculture. This is a traditional agricultural practice in many parts of Asia, Africa, and South America. It has many local names such as lading in Southeast Asia, milpa in Central America, chitemene or devi in Africa, and Jena in Sri Lanka. In India, we call it as Daya, Penda, Bewar, Nevad, Jhum, Podu, Khandat, and Kumri are some of the local terms for Sweden agriculture or shifting agriculture. So, in shifting agriculture, parts of the forest are cut and burned in rotation. So, in this cultivation, parts of the forest are cut and burned in rotation. Seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains, and the crop is harvested in October November. Such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then left fallow for 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back. A mixture of crops is grown on these plots. In central India and Africa, it could be millets, in Brazil, manioc, and in other parts of Latin America, maize and beans. We have a figure here. Figure 15. Tonya cultivation was a system in which local farmers were allowed to cultivate temporarily within a plantation. In this photo, taken in Tharavadi division in Burma in 1921, the cultivators are showing paddy. The men makes holes in the soil using long bamboo poles with iron tips. The women sow paddy in each hole. European foresters regarded this practice as harmful for the forest. They felt that land which was used for cultivation every few years could not grow trees for railway timber. When a forest was burnt, there was the added danger of the flames spreading and burning valuable timber. So it was a loss for them. Here's another figure, figure 16, burning the forest, Penda or Podu plot. In shifting cultivation, a clearing is made in the forest, usually on the slopes of hills. After the trees have been cut, they are burnt to provide ashes. The seeds are then scattered in the area and left to be irrigated by the land. So they depended on land, on rain. Okay, and they left for the irrigation by the rain. Shifting cultivation also made it harder for the government to calculate taxes. Therefore, the government decided to ban shifting cultivation. As a result, many communities were forcibly displaced from their homes in the forest. Some had to change occupations, while some resisted through large and small rebellions. And we have another figure, figure 17, a little fisherman. Children accompany their parents to the forest and learn early how to fish, collect forest produce, and cultivate. The bamboo trap, which the boy is holding in his right hand, is kept at the mouth of a stream. The fish flow into it. Figure 2.3, Who could hunt? The new forest laws changed the lives of forest dwellers in yet another way. Before the forest laws, many people who lived in or near forest had survived by hunting deer, uh, partridges, and a variety of small animals. This customary practice was prohibited by the forest laws. Those who were caught hunting were now punished for poaching. While the forest laws deprived people of their customary rights to hunt, hunting of big game became a sport. In India, hunting of tigers and other animals had been part of the culture of the court and nobility for centuries. Many Mughal paintings show princes and emperors enjoying a hunt. But under colonial rule, the scale of hunting increased to such an extent that various species became almost extinct. The British saw large animals as signs of a wild, primitive, and savage society. They believed that by killing dangerous animals, the British would civilize Indians. So here's a figure, figure 18. Lord reading hunting in Nepal. Count the dead tigers in the photo. When British colonial officials and rajas went hunting, when British colonial officials and rajas went hunting, they were accompanied by a whole retinue of servants. Usually, the tracking was done by skilled village hunters, and Sahib simply fired the shot. They gave rewards for the killing of tigers, wolves, and other large animals on the grounds that they posed a threat to cultivators. Over 80,000 tigers, 150,000 leopards, and 200,000 wolves were killed for reward in the period 1875 to 1925. Gradually, the tiger came to be seen as a sporting trophy. The Maharaja of Sarguja alone shot 1,157 tigers and 2,000 leopards up to 1957. A British administrator, George Yule, killed 400 tigers. Initially, certain areas of forest were reserved for hunting. Only only much later did environmentalists and conservators begin to argue that all these species of animals needed to be protected and not killed. 2.4 New trades, new employments, and new services. While people lost out in many ways after the Forest Department took control over the forest, some people benefited from the new opportunities that had opened up in trade. Many communities felt their Okay, many communities left their traditional occupations and started trading in forest products. This happened not only in India but across the world. Let's come to source C. Baigas are a forest community of central India. In 1892, after their shifting cultivation was stopped, they petitioned to the government. We daily starve, having had no food grain in our possession. The only wealth we possess is our eggs. We have no clothes to cover our body with, but we pass cold nights by the fireside. We are now dying for want of food. We cannot go elsewhere. What fault have we done that the government does not take care of us? Prisoners are supplied with ample food in jail. A cultivator of the grass is not deprived of his holding, but the government does not give us our right who have lived here for generations past. Then we have, for example, with the growing demand for rubber in the mid 19th century, the Munduruku peoples of the Brazilian Amazon who lived in villages on high ground and cultivated manioc began to collect latex from wild rubber trees for supplying to traders. Gradually they descended to live in trading posts and became completely dependent on traders. In India, the trade in forest products was not new. From the medieval period onwards, we have records of Adivasi communities trading elephants and other goods like hides, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, spices, fibers, grasses, gums, and resins through nomadic communities like the Banjaras. So all of these they were traded in these goods or forest produce. With the coming of the British, however, trade was completely regulated by the government. The British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right to trade in the forest products of particular areas. Grazing, hunting by local people were restricted. In the process, many pastoralist and nomadic communities like the Korava, Karacha, and Yeruluka of the Madras Presidency lost their livelihoods. Some of them began to be called criminal tribes. So some of them were called criminal tribes and were forced to work instead in factories, mines, and plantations under government supervision. New opportunities of work did not always mean improved well being for the people. In Assam, both men and women from forest communities like Santals and Oraons from Jharkhand and Gonds from Chhattisgarh were recruited to work on tea plantations. Their wages were low and conditions of work were very bad. They could not return easily to their home villages from where they had been recruited. So they were not allowed to return to their home villages even. Now let's come to source D. Rubber extraction in the Putumayo. Everywhere in the world, conditions of work in plantations were horrific. The extraction of rubber in the Putumayo region of the Amazon by the Peruvian Rubber Company with British and Peruvian interests was dependent on the forced labor of the local Indians called Huitotos. From 1900 to 1912, the Putumayo output of 4,000 tons of rubber was associated with a decrease of some 30,000 among the Indian population due to torture, disease, and flight. A letter by an employee of a rubber company describes how the rubber was collected. The manager summoned hundreds of Indians to the station. He grasped his carbine and machete and began the slaughter of these defenseless Indians, leaving the ground covered with 150 corpses, among them men, women, and children. Bathed in blood and appealing for mercy, the survivors were heaped with the dead and burned to death, while the manager shouted, "I want to exterminate all the Indians who do not obey my orders about the rubber that I require them to bring in." So, this is the scenario there in the Amazon for rubber plantation. Excuse me, this was the scenario of the Amazon for the rubber planters. Now we have number 3, rebellion in the forest. In many parts of India and across the world, forest communities rebelled against the changes that were imposed on them. The leaders of these movements against the British, like Sidhu and Kanu in the Santhal Parganas, Birsa Munda of Chotanagpur, or Alluri Sita Rama Raju of Andhra Pradesh are still remembered today in songs and stories. We will now discuss in detail one such rebellion which took place in the kingdom of Bastar in 1900. So here we have a figure. Figure 20, Bastar in 2000. In 1947, Bastar Kingdom was merged with Kangar, Kankar Kingdom and become Bastar District in Madhya Pradesh. In 1998, it was divided again into 3 districts: Kankar, Bastar, and Dantewada. So the 3 districts are Kankar, Bastar, and Dantewada. In 2001, these became part of Chhattisgarh. The 1910 rebellion first started in the Kangar forest area, encircled and soon spread to other parts of the state. So let's see about a rebellion. 3.1, The People of Bastar. Bastar is located in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh and borders Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and Maharashtra. The central part of Bastar is a plateau. To the north of this plateau is the Chhattisgarh Plain, and to its south is the Godavari Plain. The river Indravati winds across Bastar east to west. The river Indravati winds across Bastar from east to west. A number of different communities live in Bastar, such as Maria and Muria Gons, Dhurvas, Bastras, and Halwas. They speak different languages but share common customs and beliefs. The people of Bastar believed that each village was given its land by the earth, and in return they look after the earth by making some offerings at each agricultural festival. We have a figure 19, Army Camp in Bastar 1910. This photograph of an army camp was taken in Bastar in 1910. The army moved with tents, cooks, and soldiers. Here is a sepoy. Here a sepoy is guarding the camp against rebels. In addition to the earth, they show respect to the spirits of the river, the forest, and the mountain. Since each village knows where its boundaries lie, the local people look after all the natural resources within that boundary. If people from a village want to take some wood from the forest of another village, they pay a small fee called devsari, dand, or man in exchange. Some villages also protect their forest by engaging watchmen, and each household contributes some grain to pay them. Every year there is one big hunt where the headmen of villages in a pargana cluster of villages meet and discuss issues of concern, including forest. The fears of the people. When colonial government proposed to reserve when they proposed to reserve two-thirds of the forest in 1905 and stop shifting cultivation, hunting and collection of forest produce, the people of Bastar were very worried. Some villages were allowed to stay on in the reserved forests on the condition that they work free for the forest department in cutting and transporting trees and protecting the forest from fires. Subsequently, these came to be known as forest villages. People of other villages were displaced without any notice or compensation. For long, villagers had been suffering from increased land rents and frequent demands for free labor and goods by colonial officials. Then came the terrible famines in 1899 to 1900. So there was a terrible famine, and again in 1907 to 1908. Reservations proved to be the last straw. People began to gather and discuss these issues in their village councils, in bazaars, and at festivals, or wherever the headmen and priests of several villages were assembled. The initiative was taken by the Durvas of the Gangar forest, where reservation first took place. Although there was no single leader, many people speak of Gunda Dhur from village Nethanar as an important figure in the movement. In 1910, Mango bought a lump of earth. It means a mango branch, a lump of earth, chilies, and arrows began circulating between villages. So, what happened in 1910? Mango branch, a lump of earth, chilies, and arrows began circulating between villages. These were actually messages inviting villagers to rebel against the British. Every village contributed something to the rebellion expenses. Bazaars were looted, the houses of officials and traders, schools and police stations were burnt and robbed, and grain redistributed. Most of those who were attacked were in some way associated with the colonial state and its oppressive laws. William Ward, a missionary who observed the events, wrote, "From all directions came streaming into Jagdalpur police, merchants, forest peons, schoolmasters, and immigrants." Here is the source. Source E. Bhondia collected 400 men, sacrificed a number of goats, and started off to intercept the Diwan who was expected to return from the direction of Bijapur. This mob started on the 10th February, burned the Marenga school, the police post, lines and pound at Kaslur, and the forest at Tokapal, Rajur, detached a contingent to burn Karanji school, and captured a head constable and 4 constables of the State Reserve Police who had been sent out to escort the Diwan and bring him in. The mob did not maltreat the guards seriously, but eased them of their weapons and let them go. One party of rebels under Bhondia Majhi went off to the Koir River. So they went to the Koir River to block the passage there in case the Diwan left the main road. The rest went on to Dilmili to stop the main road from Bijapur. Buddhu Maji and Harchand Neg led the main body. So this is the source about the rebellion, what happened actually. Then we have another source, source F. Elders living in Bastar recounted the story of this battle they had heard from their parents. Podiyami Ganga of Kankapal was told by his father, Podiyami Tokeli, that the British came and started taking land. The Raja didn't pay attention to things happening around him. So seeing that land was being taken, his supporters gathered people. War started. His staunch supporters died and the rest were whipped. My father, Podiyami Tokeli, suffered many strokes, but he escaped and survived. It was a movement to get rid of the British. The British used to tie them to horses and pull them. From every village, 2 or 3 people went to Jagdalpur. Gargideva and Michkola of Chitpal, Dole, and Adrabundi of Markamiras, Vadapandu of Baleras, Unga of Palem, and many others. Similarly, Chandru and elder from village Nandrasa said, on the people's side were the big elders like Mile Mudal of Palem, Soyekal Dhurva of Nandrasa, and Pandva Machi. People from every Pargana camped in Alnar Tarai. The Paltan, that is force, surrounded the people in a flash. Gunda Dhur had flying powers and flew away. But what could those with bows and arrows do? The battle took place at night. The people hid in shrubs and crawled away. The army Baltan also ran away. All those who remained alive of the people somehow found their way home to their villages. So, this is what happened. The British sent troops to suppress the rebellion. The Adivasi leaders tried to negotiate, but the British surrounded their camps and fired upon them. After that, they marched through the villages, flogging and pushing those who had taken part in the rebellion. Most villages were deserted by people fled into the jungles. It took 3 months from February to May for the British to regain control. However, they never managed to capture Gundadur. In a major victory for the rebels, work on conservation was temporarily suspended, and the area to be reserved was reduced to roughly half of that planned before 1910. So it was partly successful, we can say, but so many people lost their lives also. The story of the forest and people of Bastar does not end there. After independence, the same practice of keeping people out of the forest and reserving them for industrial use continued. In the 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of natural sal forest should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. It was only after protest by local environmentalists that the project was stopped. Let us now go to another part of Asia, that is Indonesia, and see what was happening there over the same period. So now let's go to Indonesia. Forest transformations in Java. So Java is a region or a place in Indonesia. Java is now famous as a rice producing island in Indonesia. So it is an island which is a part of Indonesia. But once upon a time it was covered mostly with forest. The colonial power in Indonesia were the Dutch. So for India, the colonial power were the British. But for Indonesia, the colonial power were the Dutch. And as we will see, there were many similarities in the laws for forest control in Indonesia and India. The forest laws were almost similar between Indonesia and India. Java, which is in Indonesia, is where the Dutch started forest management. So in Java, they started this forest management. Like the British, they wanted timber from Java to build ships. In 1600, the population of Java was an estimated 3.4 million. There were many villages in the fertile plains, but there were also many communities living in the mountains and practicing shifting cultivation. Now we have 4.1. The Woodcutters of Java. The Kalangs. The Kalangs of Java were a community of skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. They were so valuable that in 1755, when the Mataram kingdom of Java split, the 6,000 Kalang families were equally divided between the two kingdoms. Without their expertise, it would have been difficult to harvest teak and for the kings to build their palaces. When the Dutch began to gain control over the forest in the 18th century, they tried to make the Kalangs work under them. In 1770, the Kalangs resisted by attacking a Dutch fort at Joanna, but the uprising was suppressed. 4.2 we have Dutch scientific forestry. In the 19th century, when it became important to control territory and not just people, the Dutch enacted forest laws in Java restricting villagers' access to forest. Now, wood could only be cut for specified purposes, like making river boats or constructing houses, and only from specific forest under close supervision. Villagers were punished for grazing cattle in young stands, transporting wood without a permit, or traveling on forest roads with horse carts or cattle. Here's a figure. Figure 21. Train transporting teak out of the forest. Late colonial period. As in India, the need to manage forest for shipbuilding and railways led to the introduction of a forest service. So just like in India, in Indian Forest Service, so just like that they introduced a forest service. In 1882, 280,000 sleepers were exported from Java alone. However, all this required labor to cut the trees, transport the logs, and prepare the sleepers. The Dutch first imposed rents on land being cultivated in the forest and then exempted some villages from these rents if they worked collectively to provide free labor and buffaloes for cutting and transporting timber. This was known as the Blandong Diensten system. So this is what we call as the Blandong Diensten system. Later, instead of rent exemption, forest villagers were given small wages, but their right to cultivate forest land was restricted. We have a source G. Dirk van Hogendorp. So Dirk van Hogendorp, and official of the United East India Company in colonial Java, said, Batavians, be amazed. Hear with wonder what I have to communicate. Our fleets are destroyed, our trade languishes, our navigation is going to ruin. We purchase with immense treasures timber and other materials for shipbuilding from the northern powers, and on Java we leave warlike and mercantile squadrons with their roots in the ground. Yes, the forests of Java have timber enough to build a respectable navy in a short time, besides as many merchant ships as we require. So, yes, the forests of Java have timber enough to build a respectable navy in a short time, besides as many merchant ships as we require. In spite of all the cutting, the forests of Java grow as fast as they are cut, and could be inexhaustible under good care and management. 4.3 Samin's Challenge. Around 1890, Surontiko Samin of Randublatung village. So, around 1890, we have a person named Suron Tiko Samin of Randublatung village. A thick forest village began questioning state ownership of the forest. He argued that the state had not created the wind, water, earth, and wood, so it could not own it. Soon a widespread movement developed. Amongst those who helped organize it were Samin's sons-in-law. By 1907, 3,000 families were following his ideas. Some of the Saminists protested by lying down on their land when the Dutch came to survey it, while others refused to pay taxes or fines or perform labor. So they also revolted. Figure 22. Most of Indonesia's forests are located in islands like Sumatra, Kalimantan, and West Irian. However, Java is where the Dutch began their scientific forestry. The island, which is now famous for rice production, The island, which is now famous for rice production, was once richly covered with teak. So here is a map of the Indonesia. Then 4.4 War and Deforestation. The First World War and the Second World War had a major impact on forest. In India, working plants were abundant at this time, and the Forest Department cut trees freely to meet British war needs. In Java, just before the Japanese occupied the region, in Java, just before the Japanese occupied the region, the Dutch followed a scorched earth policy, destroying sawmills and burning huge piles of giant thick logs so that they could not fall into Japanese hands. The Japanese then exploited the forest recklessly for their own war industries, forcing forest villagers to cut down forest. Many villagers used this opportunity to expand cultivation in the forest. And after the war, it was difficult for the Indonesian Forest Service to get this land back. As in India, people's need for agricultural land has brought them into conflict with the forest department's desire to control the land and exclude people from it. Figure 23. Here's a figure 23. Indian Munitions Board. War timber sleepers piled at Sule Pagoda ready for shipment. 1917. The Allies would not have been successful in the First World War and the Second World War if they had not been able to exploit the resources and people of their colonies. Both the world wars had a devastating effect on the forests of India, Indonesia, and elsewhere. The Forest Department cut freely to satisfy war needs. 4.5 New developments in forestry. Since the 1980s, governments across Asia and Africa have begun to see the scientific forestry and the policy of keeping forest communities away from forest has resulted in many conflicts. Conservation of forest rather than collecting timber has become a more important goal. The government has recognized that in order to meet this goal, the people who live near the forest must be involved. In many cases across India, from Mizoram to Kerala, dense forests have survived only because villagers protected them in sacred groves known as Sarnas, Devarakudu, Kan, Rai, etc. Some villages have been patrolling their own forest, with each household taking it in turns instead of leaving it to the forest guards. Local forest communities and environmentalists today are thinking of different forms of forest management. Here's another figure, Figure 24. Log yard in Rembang under Dutch colonial rule. So that's all guys. See you in my next video. Bye.